So tonight we're doing something special because it is nearly Purim. So we're going to discuss a Purim lesson, something from the book of Esther, how to be a Jewish hero. And I'd like to begin with the observation that the Purim story has two prominent heroes, hero and heroine. Of course, it's known as Megillas Esther, and I think we would all agree that Esther is the heroine. But interestingly, when we look at it closely, we see that Mordechai's role, it's a kind of role reversal in which Mordechai is the advisor, the consultant, maybe the motivator behind the scenes. And Esther is the one who's in the public eye, at least in the king's eye, she's the queen after all, but she takes her cue from Mordechai. So it's an interesting phenomenon in which is really apt for the book of Esther, because as we know, the whole book of Esther, the whole story of Esther, the whole drama surrounding the Purim peril and the Purim delivery, the Purim salvation, it was all in a kind of muted way in which the divine hand is obscured, in which we have to look behind the scenes to understand the sequence of events. And in that sense, of course, it is also hinted to in the very word Megillas Esther. Of course, the Megillah is a scroll, like from the word gal or galgal. Galgal is a wheel, a gal is a wave. So Megillah is that which is a scroll, that which rolls because it was made and still is made as a scroll. But the word Megillah also means to reveal. Legalot is to uncover or to reveal. So Megillat Esther, the name Esther derives from the word Hester, which means hidden. So Megillat Esther itself alludes to revealing that which is hidden. And therefore, it is apt that Mordechai, who is the consultant to the king, he's a courtier of the king, he's in the king's cabinet, and he is one who sits or whose workplace, so to speak, is Bishar HaMelech, at the gate of the palace. And in that sense, Mordechai is pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Of course, at a certain point, Haman attempts to do so, and he nearly succeeds. But what I want to point out is that Mordechai actually, even at the very end, when the miracle, to the extent that it is revealed, has run its course, the very last verse says, Ki Mordechai HaYehudi Mishneh LaMelech Achashverosh. He's the viceroy, he's the second to the king. Again, no doubt a prominent position, but he's identified as the one who is in second place. He's the sidekick, so to speak. And as I said, in the case of Esther as well. So this is interesting. And I like to look more closely at the heroism of Mordechai. And we'll try to come up with maybe not a formula, but at least one aspect of how to be a Jewish hero, a Purim lesson for tonight. So I would also like to say that as in keeping with our Thursday night minhag, where my intention is to keep this to half an hour. So let's get started. So Haman is the villain of the story. Haman is the one who's the Tzorer HaYehudim. He's the one who seeks the detriment of the Jewish people, not just the detriment, but as we know, their annihilation. And yet, and here's my first point, when we actually read the story, it is evident that even though Haman is one who hates the Jews, he wants to destroy them, but Mordechai actually intensifies the problem. Mordechai actually enrages Haman. As we know, the story, the Megillas Esther describes how Haman was obsessed with his own prestige. Probably he was insecure, and therefore he was desperate for acclaim and for aggrandizement. And he insisted at the king, and the king issued such a decree, everyone has to bow to Haman when he comes by. Now, the truth is, even though in our culture that is very gauche and very OTT, probably in ancient Persia, it was the norm, in fact. But nevertheless, it was codified in law that everyone has to bow to Haman, and Mordechai didn't bow. He wouldn't even move a muscle. He wouldn't even get up from his place, let alone bow. He ignored him entirely. And we read in the Megillah explicitly, Mordechai lo yichrav v'lo yishtachaveh, and v'yimaleh Haman chamas. Haman was very angry. Haman was driven to rage, and probably his fragile ego was badly fractured because of what Mordechai did. And you can easily imagine the Jewish people asking, Mordechai, what is your problem? Just bow to him. Now, of course, it's true that Jews don't like to bow, and we don't certainly bow to idols, certainly not, but bowing to people would be allowed. Again, it was the norm in ancient Persia. And so there's a medrash that Haman was very dastardly, and he kept an image of an idol in his arms or dangling around his neck, so that whoever bowed to him was bowing to the idol as well. Okay, but in terms of the actual narrative, it would seem that Mordechai actually precipitated the problem. So we need to wonder, why did Mordechai act that way? And furthermore, since he did precipitate the problem, he almost brought the problem on himself and on all the Jews. Why is it that when now Mordechai suggests a solution to the problem, meaning, well, I don't know, a solution, but a response to gather the Jewish people and to pray and to fast, they seem to fall into line. And we've got to wonder why that is. Because, as I said, the person who seemingly caused the problem in the first place is none other than Mordechai himself. I think that Mordechai's behavior would prima facie appear to be a fulfillment of that wise aphorism: there is no situation, however dire, that cannot be made worse by mismanagement. So Haman hates the Jews, and Haman is now cozying up to the king, and the king, who maybe is very gullible or very credulous or very readily influenced, is prepared to essentially allow Haman to dictate policy generally and vis-a-vis the Jews as well. It's very dangerous, and yet Mordechai seems to have made it worse. I just would like to add as well that there is an explanation mentioned, I think, in the Gemara as well, that Mordechai is HaYehudi, but he's also from Ish Yemini, he's from Benjamin. According to our tradition, because Mordechai is from the tribe of Benjamin, therefore Mordechai is not inclined, you could even say he's like, has an innate he has an innate antipathy to bowing to Haman. Haman, as we know, is a descendant of Agag. Haman is from Amalek. Amalek is a grandson of Esau. And all of the Jewish, I would say all the ancestors of the Jewish people collectively bowed to Esau. Yaakov bowed to Esau, his wives bowed to Esau, and all of his sons bowed to Esau, except for one. One did not bow, and that is Binyamin. Binyamin did not bow to Esau. Why? He wasn't born yet. When they had that fateful encounter, Binyamin was not yet born. So there is an idea that Binyamin does not bow to Esau or to any descendant of Esau. Mordechai is a descendant of Binyamin. Haman is a descendant of Amalek, and of course, therefore, a descendant of Esau. Mordechai doesn't bow to Esau. Okay, so Mordechai will not bow to Haman. Okay, but at what cost? At what price? When Mordechai's intransigence has actually, and his obstinacy has actually precipitated the whole crisis. Moreover, according to the Medrash, Mordechai would actually seek out opportunities or create opportunities to rile Haman by not bowing to him. So when he heard that Haman was coming, he would make a point of running to where Haman is going to pass, so that Mordechai, would sit down in his place. Everyone would stand to attention and bow, prostrate themselves to Haman, and Mordechai would not. And Haman would go mad with rage, anger, and all the rest of it. So again, it would seem, according to the rabbinic tradition, that Mordechai actually precipitated the problem. So I would like to answer this question of how Mordechai and why Mordechai acted that way. And then we'd like to also answer the question of how it is that the Jewish people were prepared to fall into line with Mordechai, to applaud Mordechai, to act in accordance with his instructions, and ultimately to elevate him as the great hero. So let's talk first about the basis for why Mordechai acted the way he did. So there's an interesting medrash. The medrash says, the medrash is found in the Yalkut Shimoni. It's also found in Esther Rabbah. Let me tell you the context. The Torah says when Amalek first appears, not as an individual, but as a nation, when the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim, and Amalek comes to attack the Jewish people. The Torah narrates this at the end of Parshas Beshalach. It's the reading actually for Purim morning. We'll read it a week from today on Purim morning. Vayavo Amalek. The Torah says there towards the end, V'yomer Hashem al Moshe, after, so let me just remind you, Haman attacks the Jewish people. Hashem says to Moshe, instruct Yehoshua to lead the battle against Amalek, which Yehoshua does, and Yehoshua triumphs. He doesn't vanquish Amalek, but he defeats Amalek. Okay, then the Torah says, put it into the ears of Yehoshua, I will destroy Amalek entirely. This is the sort of promise or the assurance, possibly the charge that Yehoshua is given to ensure the destruction of Amalek. It's interesting. This will only be fulfilled once the Jewish people enter the land of Israel, and it took them a long time to get around to it. Probably they never actually destroyed Amalek in his entirety. That's why we're recalling the Purim story, which happened hundreds of years after these events, and yet Amalek in the form of Haman is still around, and probably still even around to this very day. But what the Medrash says is something quite interesting. Let me read you a few lines of it. In Hebrew is quite straightforward. If anyone has a copy of Yalkut Shimoni to hand, you can get it out. Probably you don't have, but if you do, you'll find it on that pasuk. Okay. Says the Medrash, V'sim b'aznei Yehoshua, that tells us that on that day, Yehoshua was anointed. It doesn't mean literally anointed, but it means he was appointed, although in a kind of a muted manner. He was designated, he was destined to succeed Moshe and to take the Jewish people into the land of Israel. Says the Medrash, Rabbi Eliezer Hamadai Omer, this is one of 4 tzaddikim, very interesting, one of 4 righteous people who were given a hint. Remez means a hint. Shnayim chashu, 2 of them got the hint and 2 of them did not. Interestingly, the 2 who did not get the hint, one of them is Moshe himself, because this pasuk should have served as a sufficient as a hint to Moshe that you're not going to take the Jewish people into the land of Israel. That's why you've got to give this task of destroying Amalek to Yehoshua. But Moshe didn't get the hint, because we find sometime later, Moshe importuned God, ve'eschanan, repeatedly, let me in, let me in. Here's the Medrash seems to say, Moshe should have known he's not going to go in. Even at this early stage, the Jewish people had just left Mitzrayim, they just crossed the sea. And even at that early stage, Hashem hinted to Moshe, Yehoshua is going to be your successor. He's going to take the Jewish people into the land. Who's another tzaddik who got a hint? He didn't get the hint, meaning the hint came to him, didn't pick it up. He was not alert to it. He was not sensitive to it. Yaakov Avinu, it says, I'm with you, I will accompany you wherever you go, I will guard you wherever you go. Hashem said that to Yaakov when he was in his dream, or actually after the dream, during the dream, on his way out of the land of Israel, and Hashem assured him, I will guard you, I will protect you. Nevertheless, some years later, when Yaakov came back to the land of Israel, and he heard about, or he was worried that Esau was going to confront him, he was very afraid. Why was he afraid? Shemi Yigrom Hachet. Maybe I had the assurance, but maybe I have sinned, and therefore my guarantee has lapsed. It's been voided. The manufacturer's guarantee has been breached, has been voided. Says the Medrash, if Yaakov had gotten the hint, he would have realized, don't worry, Hashem has given you his assurance. Okay. Says the Medrash, Moshe and Yaakov, they didn't get the hint. Who did get the hint? Very interesting. Okay, probably you realize one of the people has to be Mordechai. We're talking about him tonight. I'll tell you the other one as well. The other one lived before Mordechai, David, the future David HaMelech, but before he became the king. David got a hint and he picked it up. Shenemar, listen, the Medrash, the Pasuk says, now this is when David was not the king. David was not the son-in-law of the king either. David was a shepherd, and David was not a warrior even, but as the story is related, very well known in the book of Shmuel, Goliath was taunting the Jewish army, and everyone was afraid. Even the king, Shaul himself, was also afraid. And David approached Shaul and he says, you know what? I was a shepherd looking after the flock, and a lion and a bear came and they carried off one of the sheep. And I went after the animal and I struck him. V'hitzalti mipiv, and I saved the sheep. And he says, you know what? I'm just a shepherd, a young shepherd, but I killed the lion and I killed the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them. I killed the lion, I killed the bear, I can kill him as well. This Philistine thug who's cursing the living God. And David prays, Hashem, please protect me. You saved me from the bear. You saved me from the lion. Save me from this Philistine as well. Says Rashi, because Rashi in his comments to Shmuel is based on our Medrash. I'll just read what Rashi says. He says, God who saved me from the lion. I know that it was not for naught. It was not just inadvertent happenstance, coincidence that this event befell me. But I knew that in the future, a similar scenario would come about in which I will be mismatched. I will be vulnerable and frail compared to a lethal, powerful enemy. But just as I prevailed over the bear and over the lion, I will prevail here as well. It says Rashi, this is one of two tzaddikim, two righteous people who had a remez, right? And then he says later on, okay, that's what Rashi says there in Shmuel, and he tells us the other one as well. The other one, of course, is our hero Mordechai. Shenemar v'chol yom v'yom Mordechai mesalech lifnei Chatzar Hamelech. Every day, Mordechai is going by the king's courtyard. If you have the book of Esther with you, which perhaps you do, take a look at chapter 2, verse 11, because that's where it says that day by day, the Mordechai is waiting to see what will become of Esther. Esther has been conscripted into the harem of the king, and Mordechai doesn't despair. On the contrary, Mordechai, you could almost say, is waiting for the events to unfold. I'll read a few more words of Rashi. Lo lechinam al sabat tzadika zu. It's not for naught that such an event, such a fate befell this righteous and chaste, beautiful woman, Esther. That she was essentially captured. She was caught in the trap or the talons of this uncircumcised king. She will, in the future, she will stand up on behalf of the Jewish people in the time of need. So the Medrash says that just as David HaMelech, or the future Melech, said that it cannot be just coincidental, it cannot be just happenstance that I was successful in killing a bear and in killing a lion. It was a siman, it was a remez, it was a hint to me from heaven that I have the ability and I'm destined to prevail over Goliath as well. And of course, so he did. The same is true for Mordechai. Mordechai saw that the Vashti has been executed or banished. The king needs a new bride. They're carrying out this ghastly beauty pageant in which the girls are rounded up by through their own free will or against their will. And Esther is taken. Esther is taken. It cannot be for just an accidental reason. It's a remez Yeshua. It's a hint to the redemption. Now, I think it goes without saying that if Moshe and Yaakov were unable to discern the hint, certainly we would not want to try this at home, as we used to say. What worked for David and what worked for Mordechai may not work for anyone else. But nevertheless, we do find such a precedent, such a concept of remez Yeshua min hashamayim. So it says that Moshe and Yaakov lo chashu, they did not sense it, but Mordechai, David and Mordechai chashu v'nivashu. They were sensitive to it and they were saved. What we see from here, therefore, is that Mordechai felt that it was the right thing to do, almost to precipitate the coming crisis, to bring it to a head. And that's why he actually riled Haman in the way that he did, because he had an underlying confidence based on this remez min hashamayim, this heavenly hint that ultimately it was part of the divine plan and that Esther would be the catalyst in the redemption of the Jewish people. This explains perhaps Mordechai's behavior. What leaves us, what we still have to consider, and here's where the heroism, the Jewish hero part comes in. Why did the Jewish people go along with it? Why did the Jewish people accept the leadership of Mordechai at this time? I'd like to share with you an idea that is found in the commentary called Manos Halevi. There are a number of perushim, many that have been written on Megillas Esther over the years. One of the most influential is called The Portion of the Levi, Manos Halevi. It was published, I think, in 1580 or something like that, I think after his death, after the death of the author. It was written by a rabbi who you may well have heard of. You certainly are familiar with one of his famous compositions, Rabbi Shlomo Alkavitz, Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Alkavitz. He wrote Lechadodi. And in fact, Lechadodi is an acronym. It says Shlomo Halevi is the acronym for it that you'll see in Lechadodi. If you haven't noticed it, then you'll notice it the next time you take a look. He was, I'm sure, a wonderful chazan and a poet, but he was a profound and gifted Kabbalist. He was part of the circle of Rav Yosef Karo. He was a colleague of Rav Yosef Karo. He was a brother-in-law of Rav Moshe Cordovera, Ramak. He's buried next to Rav Moshe Cordovera in Tzfat and next to the Ari himself. So you cannot have more distinguished real estate in terms of cemetery possibilities. He married in Salonika. He was part of that group, the Friends of Rav Yosef Karo, who stayed up all night on Shavuos in 1535. And then they had the Gilui Shechina, the divine revelation, in which a heavenly Magid told Rav Yosef Karo that you and your circle, your Chabura, you've got to go to the land of Israel. And so they did in 1535. And of course, they moved to Tzfat, where he lived for the rest of his life. He died in 1576 through Shlomo Alkavitz. Now, this was the first book he wrote, actually. He wrote it, it seems, when he was still single, because he writes in his introduction that he gave a copy of it to his father-in-law. Maybe that's what impressed the Shver to enable him to marry his daughter. Actually, he was a very wealthy man, so perhaps the girl was sought after in marriage. In any case, I don't want to digress too far, but my point is that Rav Shlomo Alkavitz was one of the great personalities of that exalted generation of the circle of in Tzfat of the great people whose teachings and whose halachic rulings still govern Jewish life to this day. Again, I'm elaborating slightly because he's remembered as a poet of Lecha Dodi, but he was, of course, a very great scholar as well. The Chida quotes him very often and in very profound ways. This idea, okay, I don't want to say it's not profound, it's not Kabbalistic though, but I think it is a lesson for all of us. Says Rav Shlomo Alkovitz about the last pasuk. You could say all's well that ends well. Let's take a look at the last word, especially the last verse, especially the first word in the last verse. We quoted this before, but let's look at it more closely. Gadol Yehudim, he's great for the Jewish people, great among the Jewish people. Well regarded. I found favor with the multitude of his brethren. Daresh tov la'amo, he sought the good of his people, v'daver shalom l'chol zaro, and concerned for the welfare of all his posterity. It can be suggested, and that's my thesis, that the word key, because, is the key to our conundrum, the key to the story of Esther. In other words, this last pasuk explains why Mordechai was accepted, why his leadership was accepted, even though we could say, you've gotten us into this mess in the first place. And that is because Mordechai loved the Jewish people. It says, Doresh Tov La'amo v'dover Shalom l'chol zaro, says Shlomo Alkovitz, Doresh Tov La'amo, he seeks the well-being of his people. V'dover Shalom l'chol zaro, all of his descendants. Says descendants means like those who are subsidiaries. His subsidiaries doesn't necessarily mean his own progeny, but he's the top man. I mean, he's the viceroy to the king, Mishneh LaMelech. All the Jewish people are in a way occupying positions beneath him. But even those who are subservient to him, he's concerned for them. Doresh Tolo, Doresh Shalom l'chol zaro, that he has that love of his fellow Jew. And I would like to suggest, and I saw this idea in Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, that Mordechai fulfilled what it says about Yaakov Avinu. Now, actually, I also saw Rabbi Frand quotes this in the name of the Panovizha Rav, and it could well be that the Panovizha Rav says it, but certainly it is in Emes LeYaakov, the commentary of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. As I said, it could be that they both make this observation, a very important observation. Says the Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, when Yaakov Avinu, after the dream, which you mentioned earlier, arrives in Haran, and you will recall he pitches up by the well, and at the well, he sees shepherds. He doesn't know them, they don't know him. He comes from a different part of the world. He's a complete stranger. They're strangers to one another. And he says to them, Vayomer lehem Yaakov, Achai me'ayin atem, where are you from? Says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, we don't find anywhere else that a person addresses strangers as Achai, my brothers. We do find it in certain places where someone might say my brothers to those who are not actually brothers, but they're friends, or they are neighbors, or they are townspeople. We find that Lot referred to the townspeople of Sodom, but at least he knows them. Here, Yaakov doesn't know them. Why does he say Achai? Moreover, what is he going to do? He wants to rebuke them. Says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, he rebukes them by saying, why are you still here? Why have you come in to water the flock already? The day is still a lot of time to the day. Go out and pasture the flock. Says Rashi, if you guys are paid shepherds, then you're derelict. You're not doing the job that you should be doing. So imagine that a person is driving or even walking, and he goes by a building site, and there are a large group of construction workers on a building site, but they're not working. They're sitting around, they're eating, or they're talking, they're drinking, they're smoking, they're chatting. And you say to them, hey, you guys, you're on the taxpayers' nickel. Why are you hanging around here? You're getting paid to work. Go back to work. You better not hang around for the response, because that kind of aggressive behavior, putting your nose where it doesn't belong, you're looking for trouble. Says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, an important yesod, and this is how to be a Jewish hero. Yaakov aroused in himself the love of these people. Yes, he doesn't really know them, but he addressed them as Achai, because Yaakov wanted to show them that he cares for them. It's true, he's going to rebuke them, but he's going to fulfill the mitzvah of Hocheach Tochiach with love, with understanding, with affection, with appreciation. When you believe and when you sense that someone loves you, he cares for you, he wants the best for you, as we say in America, you cut him some slack. You're prepared to, maybe I wouldn't say tolerate even, but to give him the benefit of the doubt. I would like to suggest that this is what the climax of the Megillah is teaching. The way to understand the story is because Mordechai HaYehudi, the viceroy to Achashverosh, he's the leader of the Jewish people. He was beloved by all. He sought the welfare of his nation. Someone who acts that way will be beloved. Someone who acts in that way can perform what we would call today kiruv. He can be a Jewish hero if he's acting not for his own glory, his own achievement, his own legacy, his own renown, but he's acting purely and only in the interest of the polity of his people, whom he loves, to whom he's devoted. And people can sense that. We used to say in the outreach field, they won't care what you know unless they know that you care. If a person believes that someone who is, let's say, as I just mentioned, in the Kiru field, is simply looking to save a soul, then he will run a mile. If a person, on the contrary, believes that this individual, he cares for me, he genuinely wants the best for me. And one could also say this may be the part of the reason for Mishloach Manos, in order to strengthen the bond between Jewish people. I'd just like to end with one last idea. I know we're a couple of minutes already into overtime. Ruth and I have a friend, someone that we know. He is far from religious, Jewish man. He's probably an atheist, maybe an agnostic, and he's going through a difficult time for certain reasons. And he was very touched when we invited him for Shabbos, even on the understanding that he's a self-described ethnic Jew who does not believe in God. Now, I regard him as what we say a tinok shenishba, that he never had an opportunity to learn, and his maybe childhood experiences were not conducive. In any case, I wanted to tell him that I'm not inviting you to save a soul. I'm doing it to help a Jew. So might he be inspired as a result and discover Hashem from Friday night in the Simons? Not very likely. It's possible. I wouldn't say it's a likelihood. Will he enjoy the food and the company? Will he enjoy the opportunity to spend time with friends and those who care about him? I hope so. Will this be a Kiddush Hashem? I think it will be. And that's something that we can all do. We can all be a Jewish hero at that level. We can all have Avas Yisrael. My friend and mentor, Rabbi Michal Twersky, to me, that is one, not the only one, but one of his outstanding qualities, his Avas Yisrael, his love of his fellow Jews, love of his fellow man. If we demonstrate that, if we have that capacity, if we demonstrate that love, then like Mordechai, I mean, the analogy may not be extended out that far, but like Mordechai was valued and respected and beloved, and they even followed him in a way that perhaps logic would call it to question why they did, but nevertheless, this is how to be a Jewish hero. This is what Mordechai accomplished. He was able to read the signs, and again, I'm not saying we should try to read those signs, but certain indicators we can always pick up on, and certain instructions and certain principles we can certainly seek to apply, and if we do it with love and with affection for our fellow Jew, Bezrat Hashem, the outcome will be a favorable one. Kein tihi alanu, ora v'simcha. Mir Hashem will have a joyful Purim. I thank you to everyone again for their good wishes on our grandson. And we look forward to seeing you on Shabbos, seeing you on Purim, and Lahudim Haisa Orav Simcha. Shabbat Shalom.